What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, shout out to the brother CC Motion 1998 for the $10 donation via the PayPal. He had a video request, and his video request was who would win in a prime matchup between, well, it was actually two different choices. I chose to talk about the second fight because the first fight, which maybe I'll do next week anyway, just as a bonus for him. I think it's talked about ad nauseum, so I talked about the second one because it doesn't get talked about as much, and that is a matchup between prime Lennox Lewis and prime Riddick Bowe. Now, these two actually fought each other in the amateurs, with Bowe losing. Okay? And of course, Bowe was the fighter that had the initial success first. I think he became heavyweight champion back in 1992 when he defeated Evander Holyfield, but lost to Tyler in 1993. And his peak was, I would say, between 92 to about 96 or so, or maybe 95. And he started kind of tailing off around 96, whereas Lennox Lewis, after the Oliver McCall fight, I would say, from that point until about 2003-ish, that was his era. He peaked later, Lennox Lewis, as a fighter. Now, also, another thing that has been talked about here is I think it was around 1993 or early 94, but I think it was 93. Riddick Bowe chose to actually relinquish one of his titles rather than fight the mandatory fight, which would have been Riddick Bowe. Lennox Lewis. It would have been Lennox Lewis. So, one thing that has to be talked about here, you could say it was Riddick Bowe's team that talked him into Ducky Lewis, but at some point, you got to talk about the psychological aspect here, because on some level, Riddick Bowe and his team felt like, Lennox Lewis was too much of a threat. They didn't want that fight. Now, I guess if we're talking prime for prime, right, we got to talk about them at their absolute best. So if that's the case, because we know one of the things that caused Riddick Bowe to deteriorate, in my opinion, was his lack of discipline as far as eating is concerned. His weight fluctuated greatly. And another thing about Riddick Bowe was that, he got hit a lot. He was tough as nails, had one of the great chins of his era, but still, he got hit a lot. And that caused a residual effect. And he didn't, outside of Lennox Lewis, he didn't duck fighters. You know what I'm saying? But I guess we got to take the 1992 version of Riddick Bowe, and let's go with, let's go with the 1999 version of Lennox Lewis, right? Let's go with those two versions, and they're fighting each other. Who wins? Man, that's a tough fight. Two big men. Riddick Bowe, for a guy that big, I don't know if I've ever seen a guy that big that was that effective fighting on the inside as Riddick Bowe was. Lewis, of course, was the harder puncher, though both men were capable of knocking you out. Lewis, of course, was more of, when you look at the way he fight, he was more influenced by Muhammad Ali, right? but he was bigger and stronger than Muhammad Ali. He had a great jab. Um, Lewis was the better defensive fighter, which I think would be a big factor in this. And I can't help but think that the earlier loss to Lennox Lewis would have an effect in this bout. Like, what I'm getting at is, I tend to wonder if he fought Riddick Bowe, if Riddick Bowe, fought Lennox Lewis, I wonder if it would kind of make him a little apprehensive or gun shy, which would affect his overall performance and, his natural flow of things. You know what I'm saying? I tend to think if you put them prime to prime, um, when you combine the psychological semi-trauma, to put it like that, of having already lost to Lennox Lewis in the amateurs, although that isn't always the case. Remember, Mike Tyson lost to, what's his name, Tillman, and they beat the shit out of him in the pros. So it doesn't always translate like that. But that was different, though. That was a little bit different. That was a points thing. But anyway, um, whereas if I'm not mistaken, I think Lewis kind of dominated Bowe in that fight. But that plus the combination of the fact that Bowe is a lot easier to hit leads me to think that Lewis possibly. This is one of the fights where I tend to think if Bowe doesn't knock him out early, right? That's what I think will happen. I think if these two fought each other, Bowe gonna try to go for an early knockout, right? If Bowe doesn't get that, by Lewis having a better defense and being a superior boxer, in my opinion, although they're both great fighters, I tend to think that as the fight progresses, Lewis will start building up points, a points lead over Bowe. And unless Bowe is able to land something, which is a possibility, because, Lennox was a great puncher, but as we know with Oliver McCall and what was the guy named? Rahman, we know that Lennox Lewis was capable of kind of getting a little cocky or a little bit out of his focus and doing some stupid shit. You know what I'm saying? That's possible, but we saw that less as he got older with Lewis. You know what I'm saying? But it still could happen. But man, I tend to think if they fought each other, I think Lewis is gonna probably get a points victory. I think it'll go the distance. I wouldn't even be surprised if Lewis rocked Bowe down the stretch. Because remember, Holyfield rocked Bowe, what was it, in 90? Their last fight, even though Holyfield lost, remember Bowe got rocked by Holyfield. Matter of fact, didn't he get knocked down, if I'm not mistaken? Now, that was when Bowe was falling off a little bit, but Bowe was susceptible to getting blasted. So, I'm just saying, like, if I had to think, like, I'm really trying to think this thing through. I have to give it to Lewis, man. I just think that if you take each one of them in their primes, I think that prime Lewis was just a better fighter than prime Riddick Bowe. But that's not saying that prime Riddick Bowe was not great, because he was. He was. He was a very, very skilled fighter. But You know what I'm saying? Lennox Lewis was a different animal once he got it all together. Once he was under tutelage of Emmanuel Stewart, he was a totally different fighter. And I tend to think that he would win in a points victory. Maybe something like 7 rounds. Well, no, I take that back. 8 rounds to 4, 9 rounds to 3. I tend to think something along those lines. And I think the rounds that he wins would be dominating. And there's even the slight possibility of a late stoppage, 11th round, 12th round stoppage, uh, like a TKO type situation. Or if not TKO, where he's knocked him down 3 times, just a brutal, you know, a brutal collection of punches that are just unanswered as far as Riddick Bowe just getting clobbered. I could see that. I could see that. And that's, like I said, one of the reasons why Riddick Bowe ducked Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis had his number. But, like I said, I'm not the greatest boxing expert, but I do like analyzing all time great fights. Tell me what you guys think.